Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to focus on one of the most cynical geopolitical demands being placed on a nation that's fighting for its very survival.
That's right.
We really need to analyze the synchronized political pressure coming from two key figures, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, who are both demanding that Ukraine hold elections during a full-scale war.
And this isn't just some abstract policy debate. This pressure, it's happening against a backdrop of a brutal daily reality.
Yeah.
As we examine the accounts, the imagery is just grim. We're talking daily combined missile and drone attacks, apartment blocks turned to rubble, families fighting in basements.
It's the critical civilian infrastructure too, right?
Mhm.
The power grids, heating, hospitals, all being deliberately destroyed.
Deliberately, that's the key word.
It's an unprovoked Russian aggression that's clearly designed to make civilian life impossible. And that brings us to, well, the fundamental contradiction here. Ukraine is under martial law. It has been since the invasion started back in February 2022. And under its own constitution, elections just cannot be held.
And the reason for that should be self-evident.
It should. You can't hold national elections when an aggressor is bombing your cities every single day.
Yet, despite that reality, we see this strange united chorus emerge. You have Putin demanding presidential elections, and then, almost unbelievably, Donald Trump repeats that exact demand, almost word for word.
So that's our mission today.
Exactly. Our mission is to dissect the specific, strategic, and political reasons why their interests seem to align so perfectly on pushing this vote now, and why this pressure really constitutes what the analysis defines as a geopolitical trap.
Okay, let's unpack this. The first thing we have to look at is the immediate political goal. The analysis is clear that this pressure for elections is strategic theater. It's not about a genuine concern for democracy.
Not at all. The primary finding across the account is that the Kremlin wants elections for one reason only, so it can discredit the results the very next day.
That's the first layer of the trap, then.
It is. Russia knows Ukraine is committed to democratic norms, but it also knows that holding a perfect, fully representative election while under intense fire and occupation is simply impossible.
So if Kiev actually attempts it...
The Kremlin instantly calls the entire process fake.
But who is the real audience for that? I mean, doesn't the international community already get the constraints of martial law? Is it really a trap or just, weak propaganda for a domestic Russian audience?
It's actually far more sophisticated than that. The analysis shows Russia is planning to launch 3 specific claims at the same time to undermine the result globally.
And who are they targeting with those claims?
They're targeting the global south, where these narratives of Western hypocrisy can sometimes take root, and also skeptical isolationist voices within NATO countries themselves.
Okay, so can you break down those 3 claims? Why would they resonate?
Certainly. First, they'll claim that people living under illegal occupation didn't vote, so the election isn't representative of the whole country. Second, they'll argue that the millions of displaced Ukrainians, the refugees scattered all over Europe, weren't adequately counted, which proves a systemic failure.
And the third claim is the knockout punch.
It is. The conclusion they'll draw is that the elected president is therefore illegitimate, a puppet of the West.
So it's about manufacturing doubt.
Yep.
If you can't win on the battlefield, you try to win by creating political chaos and a crisis of legitimacy.
That's it exactly. The whole exercise is designed to create doubt about Ukraine's democratic foundations right when it's facing an existential threat.
And this is where the alignment becomes so striking.
It's incredible. The accounts document that Trump has already started repeating these exact talking points. He's suggesting that without elections, Ukraine will soon reach a point where it's not a democracy anymore.
Which is messaging that only serves the aggressor's narrative.
It gives Putin a ready-made, pre-tested argument he can deploy globally the moment any kind of election is held.
Okay, so if the political messaging is the first layer of this trap, let's peel back the second layer. The analysis says this is where the core geopolitical risk is, and it's far more permanent, far more dangerous.
It is. This pressure, as described throughout the account, is designed to do one thing: force Ukraine to legally legitimize the theft of its own land.
Wow.
This is the ultimate goal for Putin, beyond the military one. He doesn't just want to impose his will by force. He wants Ukraine to commit self-dismemberment on paper. He wants the victim to accept the loss with its own hands.
But how exactly does holding an election only on free territory translate into legally accepting territorial loss?
It creates a really dangerous legal precedent. If Ukraine, under all this pressure, holds a national election based only on the territory it currently controls.
So excluding the occupied regions from the vote.
Exactly. If they do that, international law and key global bodies would interpret this as Kyiv defining its new de facto borders. It's a quiet admission that the occupied lands are permanently lost and are now outside the state's electoral control.
Let's make that really concrete for everyone listening. We're talking about Crimea, the Donbas, and the occupied parts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Luhansk.
All of them.
So Putin is trying to coerce the victim into signing a document through an election that accepts its own dismemberment.
Yes. And think about what that does. It moves the status of that stolen land from something imposed by force, which the world condemns, to a legal fact created by Ukraine itself through its own democratic process.
That would be a massive political and legal victory for Russia.
One they could never, ever secure through legitimate means. The accounts are very clear on this. For decades, Ukraine has fought against every single Russian attempt to carve away its land. Forcing an election now is just weaponizing Ukraine's own democratic instincts against its own territorial integrity.
And the analysis points to a specific benefit for Trump in all of this, connecting back to his whole desire to close the file.
Absolutely. The perspective documented in the accounts, Trump gets to present himself to his base as the big deal maker, the one who forced Kyiv to accept a political settlement that Russia could never win on the battlefield.
So he frames it as ending an endless war.
The quick deal. He gets to use Ukraine's suffering as a bargaining chip for his own political gain. And he doesn't seem to care about the consequences for international law or European security.
But let's circle back to just the moral and practical impossibility of this. I mean, let's put the politics aside for just 1 second.
Please.
You cannot vote under missile fire. You just can't. You cannot vote while drones are actively searching for targets. The message has to be that no democracy can function under this sort of genocidal attack.
That's the fundamental reality that gets ignored by people making these demands from a safe distance. This isn't about isolated skirmishes. This is a state actor actively targeting civilian infrastructure, not military bases.
Yep.
The accounts describe in detail how Russia targets power grids, hospitals, heating facilities, and just regular apartment buildings. They attack the energy systems on purpose to leave civilians freezing in the winter, and they call this strategy.
So when a politician demands elections, they're asking citizens to go to a polling station, which might not even exist anymore, and take part in a democratic process while facing a very real risk of being killed by a missile for just standing in line.
Precisely. All the fundamental requirements for a real election are they're completely violated. You need people to be safe. The state has to control its territory. People have to be free to assemble without risking death.
So demanding elections under these conditions.
It's morally obscene. It is. Democracy cannot function inside a burning building. You can't organize logistics. You can't ensure security. You can't even have campaigning or media access when the lights are out and shells are falling.
That lack of safety and legitimacy brings us right to our next section. Let's talk about Trump's behavior as it's described throughout the accounts we reviewed. His stance just mirrors Putin's agenda, and the analysis characterizes it as reckless populism, political theatrics, not a genuine concern for Ukrainian democracy.
The documentation of his statements is, it's illuminating. He's quoted warning that Ukraine is losing, and he suggests it'll soon reach a point where it's not a democracy anymore if elections aren't held. But then his very next statements give the game away.
He pivots immediately from democracy to surrender, doesn't he?
He does. He explicitly stated Ukraine needs to play ball and start accepting things, arguing that Russia has the upper hand.
And that's the core implication, right? He's not talking about the rights of Ukrainian citizens to elect their leaders.
No. He's talking about creating a political excuse to push Ukraine towards surrender and towards territorial concession.
The analysis says he's talking about closing the file and just handing Putin a political victory. When you look at it through that lens, what does that choice of language tell us?
It tells us that his moral compass is, as the analysis powerfully puts it, turned 180 degrees away from democratic values. He treats the immense suffering in Ukraine, the millions of displaced people, the loss of life, as just a bargaining chip for his own political gain.
And when you combine the demands for elections with the insistence that Ukraine has to accept losing land because Russia is winning...
The analysis makes it very clear. This looks less like foreign policy aimed at peace and more like, personal loyalty to the aggressor. One leader dictates the objective, the other reads the script for a Western audience.
Which brings us to Ukraine's own position, which is morally and legally crystal clear.
Absolutely.
Ukraine has the absolute right to defend itself and, crucially, the absolute right to postpone elections until every single citizen can vote safely. There is no moral gray area here.
None. You cannot ask a country to hold national elections while the enemy occupies its towns, tortures its civilians in basements, and is deliberately targeting the population with genocidal intent.
A real democracy requires safety and control over your own territory.
It does. And the analysis highlights that Putin and Trump want elections now, right in the middle of all this chaos, for a reason. Because chaos weakens Ukraine. It destabilizes its leadership, and it strengthens their narrative that Ukraine is losing.
So holding an election now wouldn't be seen as democratic resilience. It would be seen as a forced surrender. They're just rushing the clock.
They're trying to lock in the territorial gains from the illegal occupation before Ukraine can stabilize the front or, recover any significant territory. They want the election before the land is free. The choice for Ukraine is survival versus political capitulation dressed up as democracy.
Okay, let's synthesize all of this into the final conclusion of this geopolitical trap. If we just distill the intent, what is the one real intention behind all this pressure?
The real intention is to force Ukraine into recognizing territorial loss without getting peace, without any meaningful negotiations, and, crucially, without any justice or accountability for the aggressor's war crimes.
It's the ultimate cynical move.
It's asking the victim to validate the crime and make it legally binding.
So to summarize, if elections happen now, the analysis shows it means an official, legal, and political recognition that parts of Ukraine no longer belong to Ukraine. This is the exact outcome Russia has been trying to force since day one of this invasion.
And Ukraine has every right, both moral and legal, to refuse to hand Putin that victory. What Ukraine wants is much simpler, much more honest as described throughout the accounts. To survive, to win, and to protect its people. Elections will happen, but only when a polling station isn't a basement under occupation.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means understanding that political rhetoric has to be measured against the harsh daily reality of war on the ground and against the very clear findings of the analysis we've been discussing.
Ukraine will hold elections when Russia stops killing civilians.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Democracy cannot exist under missile fire. The political choice here is crystal clear when you look at it through the lens of geopolitical strategy.
And that leads us to the provocative thought for you to consider. Any politician who demands that the victim validates its own dismemberment, its own territorial loss through an impossible vote, is not speaking for freedom. They are speaking for the aggressor. The only ethical position, as consistently shown in the analysis, is to help the victim, condemn the aggressor, and demand accountability for war crimes. That's something to think about as you see these demands echoed in headlines around the world.